Hey there, seventh graders. How you doing? It's Mr. Garnett Cook. Uh, I hope you're having a good week and weekend. This coming week is our last week focused on ancient Greece. We will be moving on to Rome for next week, which will be our last major unit of the school year. This week, you're going to be learning about Alexander the Great, and more broadly speaking, the rise of this group of people known as the Macedonians, who will rise up, march south, conquer most of the Greek city-states after the Peloponnesian War, and really expand Greek influence farther and wider than anybody had ever imagined up to that point. And what I want to do right now is give you a little bit of a preview of some of the things that you will be learning about this week. And I want to begin with this term, a word that's important when you talk about particularly the period of Alexander the Great, and it's the word Hellenism. The word Hellenism is a term that refers to the spread of Greek culture and influence across the Mediterranean and Western Asia. The term comes from a mythological figure named Helen, not to be confused with Helen of Troy. If you've studied the Iliad, you know that the kidnapping of Helen of Troy was one of the things that brought about the conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans in the story of the Iliad. This is not that Helen. This is a different Helen, is a mythical figure. It's actually a male figure. And Greeks in the ancient times were referred to by others as Hellenes, not Greeks. And so when we talk about the spread of Greek culture, that's where this term Hellenism comes from. And this is really all about the spread of art and architecture. The Greek language, which by the time of the Roman Empire was almost the universal language of the ancient world. Greek philosophy, ideas of government were influenced by the Greeks. All sorts of ways in which the Greeks were influencing other cultures across the Mediterranean and Western Asia. And if you're wondering how that spread of Greek culture really began, you got to learn about the Macedonians and you got to learn about Alexander the Great. They are the ones responsible for the beginning of that process. So let's start with that, and we're going to pick up where we left off at the end of last week, which was the end of the Peloponnesian War. And the Peloponnesian War ends in 404 BCE. Sparta is victorious, but both Athens and Sparta are significantly weakened by that war. So, and there is, in addition to that, kind of post-war chaos among the city-states. The weakening of Athens and Sparta creates this kind of instability that will lead to several regional conflicts, actually, over the course of about a 30 to 40-year period, some of which involve Athens and Sparta and other city-states. But there's just kind of chaos in the Greek mainland and on the Peloponnesus after the war as the region is recovering from this half century of conflict. While that's happening, there's this area to the north, you can see it on the map here on the right, called Macedon. And Macedon had been kind of like this northern backwater of the Greek world. And Macedonians were kind of looked down on by people living in the Greek city-states as not quite as civilized and things like that. But by about 360 BCE, there was a Macedonian kingdom that was rising in power. And the man responsible for that is a man named Philip II. And what Philip II is doing is he is building a massive Macedonian army, very much modeling it on sort of Greek influences, particularly the Spartans, the use of the phalanx as the way that they would train soldiers. But as you'll learn this week, they also had some technological advances in terms of weaponry that will make them a fearsome army in the field. And what Philip is going to do is he's going to march south starting in 359 BCE. He's going to march south from Macedon, and he's going to conquer one Greek city-state after another with this massive army. He's taking advantage of the post-war weakening of the Greek city-states. The only one that he won't conquer is Sparta. But instead of conquering Sparta, what he's going to do is isolate Sparta, isolate them economically, and Sparta will never recover from that. So while Sparta never gets conquered by Philip, they never recover their pre-Peloponnesian War glory. Plans are made. One of Philip's great ambitions is to lead his army out of Greece and to conquer the Persian Empire and to really build a Greek empire. That is Philip's great ambition. And he wants to do that, but in 336 he dies, and you'll learn a little this week about the circumstances of Philip's death. But when that happens, the great vision of the conquering of the Persians and the expansion of the Greek world is going to fall to his son, a man named Alexander, who will become famously known as Alexander the Great. This is an image of the empire that Alexander is going to build. So if you see on this map, Greece is actually over here in the left-hand corner. And what Alexander's going to do with this massive army is he's going to start marching them east. He's going to march them south. And over the course of a very short period of time, it's actually remarkable, only about 11 years, he is going to march a massive Greek army as far east as the border of what is today India and Pakistan. He will march them into Egypt. He is going to build an empire that was one of the biggest empires of the ancient world. And Alexander's empire will be huge, and it will be short-lived. He actually, and you'll learn about this week as well, he will really build this empire beyond the point at which it could be effectively managed by a single ruler. He really gets a little bit too ambitious. He will die in 323 BCE, also under mysterious circumstances. There were rumors he was poisoned. There was also rumors he was an alcoholic and might have died of alcohol poisoning. He might have had a disease. You'll learn a little bit about that, I think, this week. But his empire will not disappear. It will simply be split into different parts after his death. And what you see here in the different colored shades here are the different sort of pieces of Alexander's empire that will be split up, that will be created after his death. The most famous was under the leadership of Ptolemy. And what will happen, and this is the area around the Nile River in Egypt, is there will be a series of rulers in this region of the Greek Empire. Probably the most famous of which, a name that we'll hear later on, is a queen named Cleopatra. I'm sure some of you have heard of her before. But the Greek empires after Alexander will remain for a couple hundred years until the rise of the Romans, who will essentially, overthrow much of the Greek influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. But this is where we see the expansion of what is called Hellenism. What you will see here is Greek culture being spread all over these regions that are under Greek rule. And so there's this period of time where this Greek influence really takes hold in the central and eastern Mediterranean. And you will see that you can still see the remnants of that today in terms of art and architecture and things like that that still survive to this day. So what you have here is an explanation for how and why a Greek influence spread so far. It begins with the rise of the Macedonians, Philip II building this massive army, his son taking over, and spreading the Greek army much farther and wider than it had ever been before. And he will leave behind the spread of Greek culture that will last for hundreds of years. This week, I'll have a couple of different assignments that will give you the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Greeks. There is a video about the Macedonians you'll be watching. And then there's an assignment that will ask the question, how great was Alexander the Great? He is nicknamed Alexander the Great. There is an interesting historical question. How great was he really? So you'll have an opportunity to look at a couple of different documents to try to answer that question. Just how great was Alexander? No question he was important. How great was he? That's the question, though, you'll be exploring. Anyway, that is the end of our Greek unit. Next week, we'll be introducing Rome, our last unit of the year. So have a good week, 7th grade. Bye.